Okay, so what we want to do today is just a basic ball rig so that you guys can start your bouncing ball animations. So we're going to set this up right in Maya. So the first thing that you want to do is just load up Maya, and you should be in your perspective view here. From there, I want to hold down spacebar, go to create, polygon primitives, and do a sphere. Okay, I'm going to leave it the size that it is. I just want to go up to the top right here. I'm going to rename it ball. So that is the ball that we are going to be working with. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go into my side view actually. So I'm going to click spacebar. Down on the bottom right, that's your side view. I'm going to click spacebar in there as well. I'm going to turn on my wireframe on shaded, just like I normally do. I like working with that on. After I'm in my side view, I've got my wireframe on. I'm going to hold down spacebar, do create, NURBS primitives, and I'm going to go down to a circle. So what the NURB is going to be is that's going to actually be the handle that we work with, so that we can make the adjustments on the bouncing ball as far as the scaling goes, the rotate goes, and the squash and the stretch that we're going to set up. So I want to click R once I have my NURB circle created, and just make it a little bit bigger. You can kind of see the outside of the lines getting a little bit bigger there. I'm just going to enlarge it a little bit so that we can start to get this thing into place. I'm then going to click E because I want to rotate this down so that it matches up with my ball. I'm going to rotate it forward. You can see the rotate Z move in there. I'm just going to type in 90. I want to put it up at 90 degrees. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than what I have here. Maybe go up to 2 for the scale for all of them. So on the right, if you just select all, put a 2 in there, click enter, it should enlarge it automatically. So that looks pretty good for how I want my handle to look. So what I want to do is select it, go up to modify, and click freeze transformations. That's just going to set this at 0. And then I also want to rename this. So I want you to select that NURB circle that we created, go up to the top right, and I'm going to call this my master move. Type in master move, and then just click enter. So now you should have 2 different objects on your screen. You should have your ball, which is what we're going to be moving around, and you should have your master move control, which is what's going to be moving the ball around once we finish up some of our constraints. So I just want to start setting up my outliner a little bit here. So I just want you to go up to Windows and then down to Outliner and select that, and it should load your outliner right here. In your outliner, you should be able to see your ball and your master move and some of the other just kind of standard items that are in here on bottom. I'm going to select my ball and my master move by clicking Shift Select, and then I'm going to click Command G. I'm going to put these in a group together. I'm going to double click on that group number 1 and rename it ball rig, and just click enter so it saves it. Then I'm going to open this up a little bit, and I want to put some subgroups inside of our main group. So I'm going to select the ball just by itself, and I'm going to group that again by clicking Command G, and I want to rename that Geo. And if you open it up, you can see the ball sitting inside. And then I want to do that same thing for our master move. So I'm going to select the master move by itself, click Command G, and that's going to put a new group 1 up there. Double click that. I'm going to name this controls and just click enter. So now what you should have in your outliner, you should have 1 main group for your ball rig, which is up on top. And then inside of that main group, you should have 2 separate subgroups, one being your geometry that includes your ball, and one being your controls, which includes your master move. So if you have that, that's kind of where we want to be before we start adding in that squash and stretch into our rig. So I'm going to close out my outliner for right now. We're going to go back into it later, but we don't need it for a little while. So the next thing that I want to do is add what's called a deformer onto our bouncing ball. And what that deformer will do is it'll actually add in that squash and stretch and kind of calculate it through Maya automatically with just some simple setup by us. It's a lot easier. You know, if we were to select our bouncing ball and be on scale, I could easily, move my scale Y and my scale Z around and get that squash and stretch that we're looking for. But Maya actually has a way to automatically calculate that, which is going to work a lot better. So what we want to do is find a way to set that up. So what we want to do first is select our ball. And then from there, I want to just hold down spacebar. And on the bottom here, you can see where it says deform. Click deform, and it should load up this other panel. In here, you'll see something called nonlinear. So I'm going to go into that. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see where it says squash. I'm just going to select squash. And then Maya will automatically calculate that squash and stretch handle, if you look up on the top right, to move onto your bouncing ball. So that looks good. We're not going to mess with the squash and stretch yet. We're going to do that in just a little bit. But that just set it up for us. So just trust me there. So now I'm going to load up that outliner again because I want to load that handle into its old group. So load up window, outliner, and in here, we have our ball rig right here with our other subgroups. I want to select that squash one handle. That's what we had just created. I'm going to middle mouse click and I'm going to drop it into the ball rig group. And you should see that now it's placed in line with the geo and the controls. I want to create its own subgroup for the squash handle as well. So I'm going to click Command G. And I'm just going to rename that to be handles. So let's just make sure our outliners are all correct. Your outliner right now should have your ball rig. And inside your ball rig should have 3 separate groups. You should have your geometry, which includes your ball, your controls, which includes your master move, and your handles, which includes your squash handle. If we have all of that, we are good to go. And now we want to actually start at setting up the rig so that the squash and the stretch really affects our ball. Okay, so what you want to do now is go up to Modify, and then go down to Add Attribute, and just select that. What that'll do is it'll load up this new kind of folder, this new screen, where we can actually add an attribute onto our master move. So I'm going to go into long name, and I'm just going to type in squash. And then I want to move down a little bit to where it says minimum. And I'm going to put -10. And then for our maximum, I want that to be 10. And our default, I'm going to leave at 0. Once I have that set up, I'm just going to click Add. And you should see over on the right, if you still have your master move selected, which you should, where you have all of your translates, your rotates, your scales, on the very bottom now, all of a sudden, you can see squash. It kind of loaded up under your visibility. That's the attribute that we just added. So if that shows over there, you're good to go, and you can just click Close. All right, so now if we were to look at that attribute, if we look at some of the other ones, if I were to click Rotate Y, it changes things a little bit. Not on the ball yet because we haven't set that up, but it does adjust things. But if I go down to my squash and I go up to 10 or down to -10, it's actually not adjusting anything. So how can we make that adjust something, and more importantly, adjust something on our ball? You can do that by using a set-driven key. So what we want to do is select our master move here. I want to make sure that I'm on the animation setting. Right now mine was on modeling, so I'm going to switch to animation. And then I'm going to go up to key. And I'm going to go down to where it says set-driven key. And just click set. So this is going to load up your set-driven key folder here. And inside of this, we can finally create that squash and stretch to actually reflect on our ball. So we need to load up our driver and our driven. The first thing that we want to do is select our master move. And I want to load that as my driver. You'll see up on top it says master move on the left. Over on the right, this is what you're going to select so that we know what's actually being affected. We want to touch our squash. So you're just going to load your squash and select that there. Nothing will happen. It'll just highlight itself blue. And that's going to be our driver. So that's what's driving this change that we're going to be making. Now we need to load our driven up on the bottom, or down on the bottom, sorry. So what we want to do for this is we actually want to load a driven from our squash handle. So that can be a little tough to select. I'm going to load my outliner back up. So go into Windows, outliner, you'll see it load. It's in my handles, and I want to click squash one handle. Over on the right hand side now, if you have the channel box loaded up over here, you're going to see your squash one handle load. Everything should be set at 0. But down on the bottom here, you can see under inputs where it says squash 1. You're just going to want to click on that. And then from there, you want to click load driven. Okay, so that's what's going to be in our driven file or driven folder down on the bottom. From there, you can actually select either squash 1 or squash 1 handle. We want to go into squash 1, and then over on the right, we want to select factor. I'm just going to rearrange these real quick for us here. So if you have your set driven key set up correctly, you should have squash on the master move loading as your driver. And on your driven, you should have squash 1 and factor. If you do have that, just select your master move, and now that will load over on the channel box. Make sure that your squash is currently set at 0. And if it is, in your set driven key, you can go ahead and just click key. So what that's saying now is that whenever our squash is set at 0, that is what our ball is going to look like. There's going to be no squash or stretch on it whatsoever, and that's kind of what we want. It's our base setting. But we want to also adjust it so that it can squash and stretch by just changing that one attribute over on the side. So I'm going to change it to 10. So I'm going to go over to my squash. I'm going to make it a 10, which is what we set as our max value. And then on the bottom here, you can see where it says outputs squash 1. I'm going to select that squash 1. What that's going to do is, since we've set these up through set driven key, it'll load them both in the same screen for us, which is nice. I'm going to go over to where it says factor. And you can see it's already got a little blue box next to it. That's because that is our driven key right now, and that's what we're adjusting. I'm going to highlight it, and I'm just going to type in 1. So if you did that, your ball all of a sudden should have a stretch. If it does, everything looks good. Your squash is at 10, your factor is at 1. Just go ahead and click key. And that's going to set that for the remaining of our animation. Now we also need to set the other way. We want to set our squash. So I want to go up to my squash here, and I want to type in a -10. Okay, and what that'll do right now is just load it back to our base ball. That's fine because we haven't actually set our squash to go any further than that yet, which is what we're going to do right now. So if you set that to -10, and down on the bottom where it says factor, this time I'm going to type in -1. So you should see your ball adjust quite a bit for that. If it did and everything looks okay, you just want to click key. And we should be good. So then close out of that set driven key. You can close out of your outliner. And ideally now, if we select our master move, my squash right now is still at -10. If I select it, hold that middle mouse down over on the screen, you should get the left and right arrows and just kind of move left and right. And you should be able to go up to 10 and then down to -10. And it should adjust your ball and give it a squash and a stretch depending on where you are as far as your value goes. So if that looks good, just click save so that you can make sure that you save this rig so far, and we're going to adjust it a little bit from here. Alright, so I want to set this at 0 for right now, because we still need to adjust a few other things. If we look at our master move right now, and I just go and I click W, it's not currently moving around with our ball. And we want it to move around with our ball because wherever our master move goes, the ball should then follow. If I go into squash and stretch, it's not doing anything other than just on the ball. But I want them to come with this master move because when we actually set up our bouncing ball animation, the only thing that we'll be touching and animating is that master move. And we don't want to have to touch that ball at all. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to load back up our outliner because we're going to put some constraints on there. Okay. So if we have our outliner selected, I'm just going to open up my ball rig folder and then my 3 subset folders so that we can take a look at everything. And the first thing that I want to do is select my master move. And then I want to shift select my ball. I'm going to go up to Constraint. And I'm going to click the point option box over on the right. I want to make sure maintain offset is on and just click apply. Okay. So now in your outliner, under your geometry folder, under your ball, you should see you can now bring that down another level. I want to click that little plus sign, and underneath that ball, you should see that ball point constraint. If you do, you should be all set there. So now we also want to set a constraint for our squash handle, because if we were to move this around right now, the ball is actually moving with our master move, which is what we want, but our squash is not working correct because it's still going back to that base value. So we need to constrain our squash as well. So I'm just going to click Control Z a few times to get that back to where we were. So the next thing that we want to do is select our master move. And then in our outliner, I want to click Command and I want to select our squash handle as well. If you click Shift, you may select some things that are in between it. So you just want to make sure you're selecting the master move first. Then your squash one handle that's right here. I'm going to go up to Constrain. And I'm going to go to the parent option box. Make sure maintain offset is on and click apply. So hopefully what that did is now if we were to move our ball around through our master move, you can see the squash handle does not stay where it was kind of in the center of our screen. And if we mess with our squash and stretch, it works. And it moves around with our master move as well. So that actually looks really good. That's exactly what we want. The only other thing you want to test is just kind of make this a little bit bigger and try rotating a little bit too. Sometimes the rotation can get messed up, but it looks like it's working pretty good for me here. So that also looks good. So what we just did is we set up a rig on this bouncing ball so that now we can do a squash and a stretch all through this one master move that we had set up. It just kind of make things a little bit easier for you as far as your animation goes, so that you don't have to animate, the scale Y, scale X, scale Z. You can just work on that one master move. Everything is in one place and everything is a little bit cleaner. So if we have everything where we want it right now, there's just a couple other small adjustments that I want to go in and make. The first one being, I just want to hide my squash handle. As you can see it, you can kind of just see it in there a little bit with your rig. It's pointless for us to be able to see it. We don't want to touch it or anything like that. So I'm going to go into my outliner, select my squash handle, and where it says visibility over on the right in the channel box, I'm just going to type a 0 in there and click enter. And that's just going to hide it. It's still available if we want it. We can turn it back on if we need to adjust it for some odd reason. But since it's something that we're never going to really be touching when we start animating, I'm just going to hide it. The other thing that I want to do is hide some of these other attributes that are automatically set up, because we don't need some of them and it just makes our list that much longer. So I'm actually going to go through and I want to select the rotate Y, rotate Z, and all 3 scales. And I want to right click on them and go down to the bottom where it says lock and hide selected. Just select that. And now you can see in your channel box, if you select your master move, you will only have your translate Y, X, and Z, your rotate X, your visibility, and your squash. Now that didn't adjust anything as far as our animation goes. We're still able to do the same exact thing. But for us, for this bouncing ball project, we are only going to be working in the one side view. We only need our ball to rotate one way, which is rotate X. So I just want to hide everything else because I don't want to get into trouble animating different fields that we're not going to be able to see that might just mess us up. So the only other thing that I want to do with our channel box is I want to just lock our visibility as well. So I'm going to select visibility, right click on that, and just click lock selected. And the only reason I'm going to do that, I'm going to close my outliner real quick, is now if I were to kind of zoom out a little bit, we're working in this side view, and we're moving our ball around, and we're moving our ball around, and everything looks good. And it's got a little bit of a squash and a stretch on it, and we can rotate it through that x-axis and everything. But at some point, we may just want to zero everything out. We may want to get back to our base point. And rather than having to go through and type a 0 in all of these, if I just select all of them now and hit 0 and click enter, it'll put us back at the beginning. If I had my visibility, if that was unlocked, it would just hide our ball. So it's just a step that can kind of help us avoid that. Okay, so now that we have our ball rig created, everything looks good. I just want to select it, everything as far as the master move goes and the actual ball. Go down in the bottom right into my animation layers, and the far right one, that's your create new layer and add assign selected objects. I'm going to select that. I'm then going to select that animation layer and just name this ball rig layer and click save. So that all looks really good. The reason that we would do that is because when we do start our animation, we are going to actually reference in this ball rig so that the file itself is a little bit smaller, and that will actually bring in those layers as well. So we know that everything that we need is inside of that one layer when we do reference it in to a different scene. So if you have everything set up now, ideally you should be able to move your ball around. You should have your squash and your stretch working pretty well for you. And you should be good to go. So what we would do is then load up a new scene, reference in this ball rig, and you are all set to start animating your first bouncing ball.